First, I'd like to just take 2 seconds to thank the Creative Mornings team for the invitation, for the help that they've given me in preparing the presentation. It was, I think, certainly chaotic at certain moments, so I think it fits the concept quite well of what we're here today. I've also been a fan of what I call a Swiss Miss for many years, so it's quite special for me to be part of Creative Mornings. So, we're here to talk about what the font, finding order in the chaos. And I hope no one expected a profanity-laced talk this morning. It's not going to be the case. It's only going to be talking about typography, which for me is my real passion. It's the thing that really drives me, of which every day I seem to find new messages and new meanings. So I'm going to try and convey some of these meanings to you today and explain the reasons why I choose the typefaces and why you would choose typefaces. So typography is all around us. It's probably one of the first things you saw this morning when you woke up. You maybe used it as a way to know how to get here this morning. Hopefully you looked at the bus that you were taking to make sure you didn't get on the wrong one. And throughout the whole passage of your journey, you would have seen different messages of typography, either through logos, through different messages that were posted on walls. So the typography is all around you and it's giving you subconscious messages. So for me in typography, there's always two aspects to typography. There is the form and there is the function. I'll start with obviously the function. The function is essential. A letter A has to be a letter A B a B. It is a legibility question, and obviously it's important to communicate the message that people are trying to get across. And then you have the form, and for me the form is the shape that you're going to put around a letter. And for me that shape is going to give you subconscious messaging. And that for me is the thing that I find I get the most passionate about in typography. Now just a word of warning, I'd say that there are two schools of thought in typography. The older school of thought that was sort of the 1970s, 80s, believed that there were only 5 typefaces that should be used in the world, and all the rest, in the words of someone like Massimo Vignetti, were crap. Personally, I think that's very sad, especially as a typeface designer. I think you need to explore and use different fonts, so I'm going to try and convince you why it's a good idea. So, I'm going to start off with actually not having me having to work, but getting you to work, so we're going to play a little game. Let's see if you can recognize the logo. Does anybody know what this is?
Here.
Absolutely. Does anybody know what this logo is?
Migros.
Migros. The orange color helps you a bit. What about this one?
Next one.
Migros.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Absolutely. So I have to make sure I'm looking at the right side. How about this one?
Siemens.
Espresso.
Absolutely. Espresso. And the last example? Lego. Absolutely. So what I'm just trying to show you through this is, especially when you're doing branding, I find that the typeface choice is essential. I was actually talking to John, who's one of the people in the team, and we were joking about the fact that when he was in the Middle East, he saw a Toys R Us logo, and he could recognize the Toys R Us logo despite it being in the Arabic script, because it was in the same style as what he would be used to in America, for example. So for me, these are the messages that the fonts are giving you. So it comes to this point, I believe, that typefaces give us signals. This, for me, is my key point. And these signals, for me, are all around us. So let's take a look at certain examples. I just pulled out some images that I found, and if I was going to go and choose a restaurant, the typeface choice, and obviously other people will be motivated by design and other things, but for me, the typeface is going to give me a message of the kind of food that I can expect to have. In this case, well, of course, he's called Jean-Jacques, so maybe it's going to be French cuisine, but they're using a classical serif typeface, so the ones with the little feet on them. So it's a serif typeface, but he's mixed in some rounded shapes on the letter forms. So I'd expect a classical, maybe high-end meal, something that would be more refined and maybe luxurious. In the second example, we've gone for a sans serif typeface, but you can see the letters are quite spaced out. We're in capitals, everything is quite light and thin. So again, the message that it's giving to me is something that's quite high-end. However, they obviously imagine they're more contemporary or more modern than the first example that was more classical. In this case, we're again using capital letters, but this time we've gone for block lettering. So this is very thick and very bold. So in this case, I'm expecting not to pay a lot of money, but I hope I'm going to have a very good chicken meal, and I hope it's going to fill me up with all the food that I want. And in the last case, ooh la la, caramel. So what's going on here? Here we have some kind of, a bit more original script. So I'm thinking of something a bit more exotic, funky going on. Maybe a home-cooked meal. There's something for me would be a bit more surprising. So indirectly, these messages are telling me what kind of food that I can perceive. Now, obviously, I'm a typomaniac, but I think everybody has this message within them. And if I give you an example, let's say I was going to create a restaurant in Geneva. I called it the Marmite because obviously we're close to the old town. So let's say we're opening this fictional restaurant called the Marmite. In the first case, I've used a typeface called Bembo, which is a classic typeface from the 1500s in Italy. Again, I'm playing on the codes of classicism, of something high-end. I've used uppercase and lowercase, but there's a refinement and a luxurious side to the typeface. I then chose to use one of my own typefaces, which is Siggy. This typeface is more comical. So here I'm thinking, this is maybe a family-run business. It looks a bit more friendly, more familiar. So I'm thinking to myself, this is something I expect to go and have a laugh. This should be a good meal and a good fun time. And in the last case, this is a typeface from Jonathan Barnbrook, Mason. And as you can see, the letter forms, they're quite exotic. On the one hand, you may think of the medieval period. It can make different connotations, maybe of the original letter forms that we would have had. So for me, there's something more mysterious about this. So here I'm expecting cuisine that could be quite original, different, maybe something plays along fantasy or mystery. So these codes are around us all the time. And I think one of the good examples of this is when you look at newspapers. So just try and ignore the pictures for the moment and just focus on the typography. But if you just look at the two comparisons between them, when you're looking at the Financial Times, we're using a serif typeface, so again, classical letter forms. What they're trying to tell you is the content that they have is hopefully real news and not fake news as everybody goes on about. So this is supposed to be researched, in-depth information, and you should be able to trust the content that they're going to give you. In the second example with the Sun, they're playing with the codes you get in a tabloid newspaper. So big lettering, sans serif typefaces, and you can see by the title that Harry's going to grab the crown jewels. It's not going to be substantial information, it's more going to be funny information and stuff that's going to fill up the tabloids. So these messages are all around us, and let's say you just graduated from high school and I gave you this diploma. you maybe don't feel very proud. Now, if you suddenly change it to this, it's something that seems like, oh, this is some kind of high-end institution. It's a small change, but it makes a difference when I suddenly put myself in Gothic or black letter typefaces. Now, if I use the same black letter typefaces for a Weight Watcher packaging, something seems a bit weird. It doesn't really work. And again, what they've done here, this seems much more familiar. They've used a hand-scripted typeface, so it seems more familiar, more personable, and hopefully will help you lose more weight. And in the last example, I thought I maybe should have changed the illustration, having Neymar rolling around after what happened during the summer, but we'll leave that aside. So you can agree this doesn't convey explosive speed. There's something that seems very strange about the typeface. In this case, yes, they're matching the message. So here they've used this kind of broken up form, they've got the italic stance, so it works for me as far as trying to transmit explosive messaging. So it all comes down to this question of the form. For me, the form is the shape, it's the clothes that typefaces wear, and it's the message that they're giving us when we're reading. I'll give you a couple of examples of some of the subtleties that I try and see within typefaces. The first example is the Garamond typeface. This is a classical style that was made in the late 1500s. People associate it to Claude Garamond, but it was actually the Garamond family, so it's difficult to associate to one specific designer. But it was part of the original French designers. They were inspired by what was happening in the Italian Renaissance and created these beautiful letter forms. For me, they're humanist in the way that you can still imagine the original tool that would have been made to create them. There are certain idiosyncrasies to the shape. For example, look at the letter A that actually slants to the inside. So it's humanist, it conveys classicism. For me, there's a message of a certain authority, but there you go, something very refined and historical. But if I want to be more refined, I would use something like Didot. Didot was made in the late 1700s by Firmin Didot, and he again was inspired by many things that were happening. And one of the major innovations that was happening at the time, by Caslon and many other designers, for example in the UK, was an increase in the quality of printing quality, paper quality, and ink, which meant that suddenly designers could make things a little more precise and more refined. And if you look at this example here, you'll see that when you're using a Didot typeface, you have thick parts of the letter and very thin parts of the letter, which would have been impossible with the original methods of printing. So for me, this strikes me as high-end, classical, refined, and it's the kind of thing you'll see on the heading of Vogue magazine. On the contrary, if you now look at the serifs on the slab lettering, this is Rockwell, you can see that it's very heavy, very thick. a lot of people think of Western movies and the wanted posters that they did, because a lot of the original typefaces were made during that period. Now, Rockwell comes from the 1930s and was inspired by geometric styles. So for me, it's got a very heavy, bold style to it. And a lot of fast food companies, for example, enjoy using Rockwell as their title typeface. Now if we move into another style, so these are what we can consider to be serif typefaces. These are sans serif typefaces, so the ones without the little feet, or it always makes me laugh because the Americans call them sans instead of sans. In the first example, I've used a DIMM typeface. This I've put here because it's very popular with designers, and it's something I've always found quite curious. The DIMM typeface was actually made by the Deutsche Institut für Normung, sorry for my German pronunciation, in the 1930s, and it was made as a typeface that was based on a rough grid and that could be made with rulers, compasses, so it was made by engineers, never made by designers, and something very mechanical that was made for signage and for various uses. So for me, it's very cold and mechanical. And okay, there are maybe advantages to that, but when people use it, for example, for an NGO, a humanitarian cause, I always wonder, is having a machine typeface the best way to express a humanitarian cause? In that case, I would actually choose something that's more of a humanist typeface. And humanism is something that is often used as a term in many fields of design, and I find it's quite a confusing term. What I mean by humanist and what we mean in type design is when you can see the origins of the letterform and some kind of hint to the original design that the letterforms would have had. Jules Sand was designed by Eric Gilles. He was one of the legendary designers in the UK, typeface designer, sculptor. He did many different things, and Gilles has been used for the BBC, for many other different things. And what Gilles was trying to do in the time, so this was the 1920s in the UK, was to create a competitor to Futura that was being very successful in Germany and the rest of Europe. And one of the things that they wanted to differentiate, if you look at the letter A, you can see the letter A looks like the Roman lettering that we would have seen with the what we call a double story. So you can see there are two levels to the letter A. This is a contrast for typefaces, for example, like Futura. The goal being to make a more legible, more functional typeface, and this for me will work much better in a setting for legibility than, for example, something geometric like Futura. And the final example in the sans serif category, I decided to put in category because category was a sort of overnight success. Most of the time, typography takes a long time to be successful. One of the recent things I read said that it takes about 15 years for a typeface to be used widely by the public or to be recognized. And category was an immediate success, for a simple reason that it was the default typeface that was chosen for Microsoft when they introduced Windows in 2007. It replaced Arial. So thankfully it replaced Arial. I'll talk about that after. It was Lucas de Groot who designed this typeface, and for me there are many things I find interesting about the typeface, but the little detail is look at the terminals, so the ending of the letter form, and you can see that they're slightly rounded. So it gives us this warmer, more friendly appeal than the Gilles or even the DIMM typeface. So it can come across as more appealing. And just as a side joke, it's one of the few typography every now and gets in the news. Category got in the news because of the Panama Papers. And if ever you want to research, have a look at Fontgate. And it was all about how typography can manage to break down the Pakistani government. So you can go and research that on your side. And the last example I'll put in, I just put in a script typeface. One of the things, I mean, you've all noticed the amount of burger places and tacos, and everybody wants to make their own food and have their own products. And a lot of the time you see this kind of typeface choice. So it's a script typeface, and it's got this kind of weathered appearance to it. So for me, what you're trying to say is it evokes the sort of 1950s, 1960s. The style is very, very reminiscent of the Californian style you would have had. And the weathered effect kind of makes you think as if it's gone through the ages. So it's something, I guess, like your grandmother's cooking. It reassures you, makes you think that there's something reassuring about it. Now, we all know that it's just a typeface, but it inspires us or reassures us. So for me, typeface choice is one thing, and then all these subtle differences are the things that make the different choices and the reasons why you can choose a typeface. And there's one thing I always try and push for is the originality. And I think that the danger with anything is in today's market, I think there's something like 300,000 typefaces that are created. There's probably about 20 new fonts that come out every week. By the way, I came out with a new font last week, so go and have a look. So I think it's important for people to go and find their own solutions, but it's obviously very confusing. And one of the dangers is that people use the safe solution. And Helvetica was a good example of this in the 1970s and 80s. So it was made by Max Menninger in 1955, designed as apparently a neutral typeface. Now, personally, I don't believe in neutrality in design. From the moment you create something, there is a point of view, there's an opinion, and of course, people have a perception to it. But Menninger's point of view was apparently to have a typeface that would have no emotion. And the result was that this typeface was very successful. Everybody started using it. And to the point now that for me, Helvetica is a bit like your pair of blue jeans. Everybody has it, everybody uses it, so you kind of you lose your original voice and your personality. So I made the joke before about Arial, and I do have to just mention that. Please don't tell me instead of using Helvetica, you can use Arial. It's, without getting into all the details of it, when IBM needed, because Macintosh came out with a great selection of fonts originally, IBM decided not to, and then they decided they quickly needed to catch up and put lots of typefaces on their computers. And obviously Helvetica was one of the most popular typefaces at the time. So they needed Helvetica, but they didn't want to pay the royalties of Linotype, who were the owners of Helvetica. So they commissioned another group of designers to make a clone of Helvetica with exactly the same width. And they would just change a couple of things in the letter form to make sure that they would get rid of any copyright issues. And for me, what they changed is, if you look at the terminals, you see in Helvetica, the terminals are straight, and you see in Arial that they're slanted. So for me, all the charm that you can have in Helvetica, it's this fantastic mix between the shape and the counter shape, so it's the white space around the letter. They lost everything in Arial. So, and I mean, what's a bit unfortunate, the state of Geneva uses Arial instead of Helvetica, which I find a bit strange in Switzerland, but there you go. So one of the more recent trends that I personally find a bit worrying, you would have thought in today's internet world, everybody's encouraging you to have your own voice. So everybody wants their own expression. But if you look at a lot of contemporary rebranding, they seem to be going the other way. So you have examples here of the original logos and some of the new logos that have been created. And as you can see, everybody's going towards this geometric sans serif typeface. And they kind of all look as if they're using the similar kind of typeface. Facebook is a good example. I remember when Facebook, the first logo came out, it was memorable for me. They were one of the first people to use a typeface called Clavica. You had this kind of condensed shape. Look at the K, you kind of get the impression it's an arrow. There was really something emotional on it, or something I felt spoke to me in the Facebook logo. And now they've gone for this thing that looks like every other font out there. So I just find it a pity that we seem to be losing some of this identity. And I guess you could say it's the same thing when you travel. When I was younger, you used to be able to go to a different city and you'd see different shops and different things. And now everywhere you go, you have the H&M and the Zara, and everybody's doing the same thing. Now, maybe there's something I'm not understanding, because recently Burberry just announced their rebranding. Now, Burberry is a great brand, and they commissioned a designer called Peter Saville. Now, this guy is a legend in design, especially in the UK. In the 1970s, he spent a lot of time working on album art, album covers. He's worked for many different fashion brands. He worked, for example, Calvin Klein, people like that. So he knows what he's talking about. But I have a difficulty buying in the theory. What he's done for me is that they're getting rid of all the charm and all the personality I thought that the Burberry logo had. Maybe the symbol was old, so maybe it needed to be refreshed. They just got rid of it. You had this extended serif typeface. They again decided to get rid of it, and they've gone for, again, a geometric sans serif typeface. And I like the fact that they've added England, as if maybe people get confused in the So whatever's going on, something I personally don't really understand. But as I said, this guy knows what he's going on about, so there's maybe something real about it. Another problem, it's not only in branding, you also see, this is a constant joke in the design circles, is Trajan's use in movie posters. Now, Trajan is a great typeface. It's based on the Trajan column in Rome. So it's considered to be some of the most beautiful capital lettering that has ever been made. Carol Twombly designed the digital version of Trajan, only an uppercase character. So it's a beautiful typeface. The problem is that everybody uses it. And again, if you believe that typefaces give you signals, they give you messages. So on the one hand, Trajan is telling me about a love story on Titanic. It's telling me about the future in Minority Report, and it's telling me about fantasy in Lord of the Rings. So how can the same typeface do all the different messages? And even more disappointing, I was a fan of, or I am a fan of Game of Thrones. And again, they've made this fantastic world. They have all these different characters, and half of them die all the time. But I mean, they have a great story. And what have they done? They've chosen Trajan as a typeface, and they've added 3 bars in the O to make it original. So again, I think they could have done something a bit better. There's something weird with the S, but that's something else. one of the problems is indeed with the originality is that, again, people sometimes fall into the trap of just always using the same typeface. And Papyrus was one of these typefaces that, again, has become a bit of a joke that you open up a Greek restaurant and to be Greek you're going to use Papyrus because it looks a bit Mediterranean. The problem is that everybody started using it, and it became a bit of a joke when Avatar came out, all the designers were saying, but how could they choose this typeface? Now, what for the type design community was really interesting is Saturday Night Live actually made a joke about this, and they had Ryan Gosling. So, you know, the ladies love Ryan Gosling, and he was talking about typography. So this was like, oh, this is like a very exciting moment for the type community. Now, the point is, it's not simply riding on the bandwagon because everybody doesn't like Papyrus as a reason not to like it. Again, it's a great font, but the problem here is James Cameron, he created this new world. The people of Blue, they speak a different language. So, I mean, you know, they've gone pretty far into the originality side, and yet they chose the first typeface they found on the list of their computer. It's a pity. Why didn't they create something very original? It could have been a great opportunity, I think, that was missed. I obviously can't talk about typography and originality without having a bit of a chapter of Comic Sans. It's the typography we all love to hate. There's even a website that's been created to try and ban it. I don't think that is correct. It's an interesting typeface designed by Vincent Conari. I have to make sure I don't mispronounce his name. And it was made for a specific use. So that use was interesting. Then it got distributed on computers, and everybody started using it for all types of messaging. And a lot of the time, I think the messaging is wrong. It is a childish typeface. So, sorry, using one thing. So when the Sun, for example, were announcing the results of the Higgs boson, and sorry if anybody is at CERN, but the argument was, let's put it in Comic Sans because it makes it more friendly. Now, I'm sorry, I put my hand up, I'm not a scientist and I don't understand what the CERN does. But the data doesn't seem any more sympathetic or interesting to me if you put it in Comic Sans or you put it in a serious typeface. So unfortunately, it's a bit of a bad opportunity. I think they should have just chosen a solid, proper typeface. And I had a recent example when I was opening up a warning for one of the packaging that I got. And again, so the point here is they're trying to tell you that be careful of bags because kids can get suffocated by the plastic bags. So what do? They choose a typeface that is appealing to children to tell them not to use the bag. Again, I just think it's a bit of a bad choice, and I'm not going to talk about the letter spacing problem between the W and the A. That's yet another issue that designers get worried about. So, with typeface choice, I really believe originality is an important factor. And I always encourage people to be original. Sometimes that originality can come at a certain cost. This is a restaurant downtown, and sorry if anybody knows the designer, or I don't want to be critical of design, but I just noticed this as a good example. There's original choices, I think, in some of the typeface designs that the people have chosen. But maybe a non-native English speaker is going to read it's a Mexican hitchin instead of reading a Mexican kitchen. So if they just slanted the bar on the K a bit, you would have had a much more legible typeface. So it's an interesting attempt, but you still have to be careful about it. And I don't know what's going on with the Y. There's something very weird with the Y. That's another. And the thing is, this kind of mistake between trying to be original and sort of going over the boundary of legibility, it's not something reserved just to local designers. There was a scandal this summer during the World Cup. And again, people talked about fonts. This is again, quite exciting. All the brands, Nike, Adidas and everything, they commissioned typefaces for the t-shirts on the football players. And Adidas commissioned someone to create this typeface, and it created this major joke on the internet that everybody was saying, what is this guy's name? He's a German player, and they were saying, you know, so they came up with all these different possibilities of what his name could have been. So again, it's one of these things, it's important. The legibility aspect is important. I encourage the originality and the risk-taking, I think, is great, but I think they should have been careful on the legibility aspect. So all this brings down to the identity question. The typeface is giving you the signal and is trying to give you that identity. And for me, I just chose one example of what I think is a fantastic example of identity. And this is for the London Olympics in 2012. This was a typeface designed by Gareth Haig. I don't even know if I'm a fan of the typeface. There are many things that are strange about it. one of the idiosyncrasies is look at the O that he's chosen to use, which is completely separate from the rest of the typeface. And apparently it was because of one of the constraints of the Olympic Committee was that they wanted a typeface that the O was evocative of the rings of the Olympic logo. So, okay, there is a reason behind it, but it seems a bit weird. But where it works is that every time you saw that typeface, you knew exactly where you were. You were in the London Olympics, and even today, it sticks in my brain as a complete memory of the moment. Now, the logo was a question mark, the typeface was a question mark. It's very British in the way that you're never really sure if you like it or you don't. It's a bit confusing, but it works, and it's stuck in my mind. And for me, this is a good example of creating an identity. So, I'm just going to finish, and I see that I'm actually speaking much faster than I expected, but that's cool. I'm just going to finish with a little case study, because what I've talked of so far is being a designer and trying to look at typefaces and how you would choose them and how you can go about picking up the different emotions of the typeface. Now, I am a type designer and I'm a graphic designer. So what I find interesting is as a graphic designer, you're finishing a complete product. You deliver something to the client, and that is it. No one's supposed to touch it anymore. It's a final piece. However, when you work in typography, you're creating a tool. And I don't know what other people are going to do with that tool. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And one of the best things for me as a typeface designer is the surprise of seeing other people using your fonts. And a lot of the time, it's evocative. So one style of lettering that I've always been a fan of is black letter typefaces. Now, it's maybe a bad example having that posted there and saying I'm a fan, but I'm not a fan of that. So the black letter typefaces, what I've been fascinated about is that it's one of the few letter forms that everybody seems to have an emotion to. When I talk about some of the examples I was showing you before, it's a very sort of type nerd specific environment where we look at all the details and we get very excited about a letter being like this or this. But black letter, everybody has an emotion. And I think for very good reason. But the history of black letter is that it was one of the first typefaces that was used. Gutenberg, when he printed his first Bible, was using Gothic black letter typefaces because it was a style in vogue in the day in Germany. And this style remained popular in Germany, obviously until the rise of the Nazis in the 1920s and 1930s. And they took over the use of black letter typefaces. So unfortunately, in today's connotation for people, black letter is associated to everything that's negative. And that's why a lot of the time you're going to see it on, for example, West Coast gangsters or a heavy metal band. And this is sort of the connotation of black letter typefaces. And sometimes I think that's a pity. Just to put in a factual, a historical fact in there, the Nazi Party did say that the black letter typeface was a German typeface, but in 1939 they actually banned it because they noticed most other people couldn't read the script. So then they tried to say that black letter typefaces were actually Jewish. So it shows you how confusing the story around black letter typefaces is. And for me, I think they really need to, I think there's still something to be explored in it, but it is potentially a bit of a dangerous subject. So the typeface I created was called Halger. It was inspired by trying to make something aggressive, angular. I wanted to make a modular in the same way maybe that the Rockwell typeface was a geometric solution to a script typeface. I wanted to make something geometric and aggressive in a black letter style. But I wanted it to be modular. I wanted to get rid of all the humanist traits and have something very rigid. Now, when I was designing the typeface, one of the things that I thought was very important is in black letter typefaces, a lot of the time you'll see that the capital letter forms are very decorative and sometimes have historical letter forms. So a lot of people can't actually use them, recognize them, or read them. So I wanted to be sure that my capital letters were relatively legible and more contemporary in their styling. We also now have what we call open type language, which allows us to play around with different scripts and really have fun with typography. So in this case, I thought, okay, I have my basic letter form, but I also wanted to hint to what was called the illuminated letters. So back in the day, a printer would print the main script, and then a scribe would draw a decorative illuminated letter to begin the chapter. And I always thought these letter forms were beautiful. They're very decorative with lots of motifs around them. So this was the idea behind the more decorative style, and they've got all the ligatures and things behind it. So the idea was to make this typeface. I was happy with it, released it, I actually can't remember when I released it, but released it quite a few years ago and was happy with the results. And then it was a question of saying who's going to use it and how they're going to use it. And for me, one of the best examples, I was sitting at home a Sunday night, and back in the day you used to watch MTV, because they used to have music video back then. And this video came across, and as a young person, I was I guess I still am today, and he's just come out with an album. I was a fan of Eminem. And so Eminem had this music video, I think it was called We Made You or something like that. And I thought, hey, that's my typeface. So it was really exciting for me. And what was cool is that they've used the decorative letters. As you can see, they've done this little trick on the K, where the K, they've added this sort of guitar branch in it. I thought, wow, okay, that's quite original. And they mixed it with a script typeface. I never thought of mixing it with a script, but it worked really well. So for me, that was a very sort of proud moment to see my typeface in there. I never met Eminem, and I don't think he chose it, but at least it was in the music video. The second example, this, I don't know if anybody's from Australia. I think it was Australia.
Oh my God, I love those guys.
You know it?
I love them.
Yeah.
Okay. So apparently this is a comedy in Australia or something about a bunch of vampires, and it's apparently a bit of a funny thing. And I read about this, that this guy had chosen my typeface, and one of the things he was saying, oh, I chose the typeface because the capital letter forms are very legible and everything. And I thought, wow, this is perfect. This is exactly how I imagine the typeface being used. Halja is actually, I think it's Scandinavian for hell or something like that. So it was like, this is fantastic. This is exactly how I imagine the typeface being used. So this, for me, was a great moment. Of course, if you design a black letter typeface, as I explained before, there is always a connotation. Now, Ridley Scott, he made a TV show, a fictional TV show, of what would happen if the Nazis had never lost the Second World War and invaded America and all this kind of thing, and it's called The Man in the High Castle. And in the opening generic, they again are using Halja. I don't know if I maybe would have gone a bit further. I don't know if the capitals is a good idea, the spacing and all that, but why not? At least it was used there. My only disappointment is they have a logo that's different in a different typeface. So I don't know why you only use it for the title, not for the rest. I hope it's not licensing issues, but anyway, so it was just nice to see. And the final example, this was designed by Brian Steedy in New York. This was very surprising for me. I'd always somehow imagined the typeface associated to things like the vampire poster you saw. But in this case, this is for the Society of Publication Design Awards or something like that. And he's done something for me very contemporary, very graphical with the different shapes and styles. He's done some strange things with the placement of the letters, mixed in some slanted, he's created his own italics. So he's played around with the typeface. But again, I thought surprising, but a very interesting example. So again, shows that the most important thing for me is have fun with typography. As a designer, we obviously create the tool, but then it's up to people to go out there and do what they think is good with it. So hopefully I've opened your eyes up a bit to what is going on in the world of typography. And the next time you have to write a message, I hope you'll see the difference between hoping to see you soon or hoping to see you soon. And I'd just like to thank you all for your attention. Thank you very much.